Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to say I'm pleased to rise on this bill to amend the Right to Information Protection of Privacy Act, but not so much, Mr. Speaker. Every government, since I can recall, since the introduction of our Right to Information legislation, has chipped away at this act, Mr. Speaker, and diminished people's right to information. It was Richard Hatfield, Mr. Speaker, who introduced this bill under his government years ago, and in doing so, he said that the business of government is the business of the people, and the people have the right to know what business government is up to, Mr. Speaker, paraphrasing. And the Deputy Minister of Justice at the time, Gordon Gregory, did a remarkable job pulling together a piece of legislation that ensured that kind of transparency, that actually enshrined people's right to access information from our government, Mr. Speaker. The right as citizens. And that right has been chipped away and chipped away and chipped away ever since, Mr. Speaker. So now it's hugely difficult to get information. It's hugely difficult to find out what government is doing on behalf of the people of this province, and the people of this province have the right to know. I remember when the Liberals were in government last time, they tried to change the title away from right to information to access to information, and I fought that hard, Mr. Speaker. I fought that hard because it is a right, but that right is increasingly becoming just in name only in the title of the legislation, and not in fact when you look at the substance of this bill and the changes that made prior to it, Mr. Speaker. We've seen the definition of advice to a minister expand dramatically over the years, shutting down access to all kinds of information that previously had been presented. Mr. Speaker, I just did a quick calculation, and I've been using the Right to Information Act for 36 years. First in my role as a public advocate in the nonprofit sector, Mr. Speaker, and then more recently in my role here at the Legislative Assembly. And I've seen over that time these dramatic changes. This bill does a number of things. One is it enshrines longer waiting times for getting information than previously had been enforced, essentially acknowledging that the Ombuds's office doesn't have the time to do the work it needs to do, and acknowledging that the number of requests that departments have to face have only increased year over year over year over year. Why? Because, Mr. Speaker, people are having to resort to the Right to Information Act when they can't get information by directly making a request to government, to a department. Can I get this information? No, you can't. So then they're in the lineup for right to information. So, Mr. Speaker, the waiting times have expanded on all fronts, whether it's getting a response from a department or the waiting time for the Ombuds's office to undertake an investigation. And that is a symptom of a much deeper problem, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the diminishment, the reduction in people's right to information. And this bill, Mr. Speaker, only accelerates that. The issue around third-party consultation, Mr. Speaker, raises all kinds of questions. And this came out before. This came out before, Mr. Speaker, in an appeal I was involved in, where the business involved argued that it shouldn't have to release water quality data, that it was required under law to supply to the Department of Environment because it was proprietary information. And, Mr. Speaker, the judge found, first was going to find that they had no case unless they tried to make a charter challenge. So they did. The lawyers on behalf of that particular enterprise decided to argue on the basis of the charter. And Gordon Gregory, actually the Deputy Minister at the time, when the Right to Information Act was first introduced and adopted by this House, intervened and argued against the lawyers for the enterprise, that in fact there was no charter protection for that information because well, he did it very eloquently, Mr. Speaker, but the upshot was just that, that information, the water quality results that had to be regularly submitted to the Department of Environment in law as a requirement of legislation, is public information, Mr. Speaker. And the third-party consultation clause in here, Mr. Speaker, gives me real concern that this is the road that this bill will lead us down, to start to block information that really is in the public realm, that should be easily accessible by the public and will no longer be. So, Mr. Speaker, the minister talks about efficiency and increased efficiency, and I understand. I know that staff find the right to information request process arduous and time-consuming, and a lot of that could be resolved, Mr. Speaker, if government would just allow their departments to release information that they're asked for. That would solve a lot of these problems. Public wants some information, department releases it. No need to go to the Right to Information Act. But that doesn't happen very often anymore, Mr. Speaker. So we get these long lineups for right to information, and we get these right to information requests are made for a lot of things. And so that creates tremendous burden on staff. So I understand the demand on the side of the public service for more efficiency. But it's not the inefficiency of the system that's the problem, Mr. Speaker. It's the lack of transparency of successive governments that's the problem. If we can slay that dragon, Mr. Speaker, the problem will go away. And it's notable to me that in the minister's speech, he talked about increased efficiency, but not increased effectiveness in terms of achieving the goals of having a Right to Information Act, and that is to ensure that people's right to information is respected. And as a colleague said on this side of the House earlier, increasingly we've seen, and over my 36 years of utilizing the Right to Information Act, and increasingly seen more and more the documents redacted, blacked out, so that what you end up with is no information at all, Mr. Speaker. And that's just unacceptable. So, Mr. Speaker, it is something that requires some fundamental debate around the issue of how to ensure that people's right to information is respected. If, in fact, the business of government is the business of the people of this province, then that information should be forthcoming on a simple request, whether it's a request to the Minister of Natural Resources and Energy, or the Minister of Finance and Treasury Board, or the Minister of Health, or the Minister of Justice and Public Safety, or the Minister of Social Development, or the Minister of Post-Secondary Education and Labour, or the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. Mr. Speaker, information should be forthcoming on request, and that is not about it doesn't require changes in the legislation. It requires a political change, Mr. Speaker, a political change that says, yes, and this is a conservative-led government, Mr. Speaker, yes, what Richard Hatfield said was actually correct, that the business of government is the business of the people, and therefore the people have the right to know what they're doing. Not releasing and dribbling information out the way they want to make sure that things don't get out that might be politically politically difficult or challenging, but providing the bare minimum, Mr. Speaker, does not meet in any way the goals and objectives of the Right to Information Act. And it is a trend, Mr. Speaker, that we've seen continue for some years now, to the point where the Right to Information Act is going to become absolutely meaningless. No rights, no information, and the government's got free rein to do what it wants. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for